Deep in the Amazon rainforest, archaeologists uncovered something that shouldn't exist. Carved into solid granite, older than any known civilization, were symbols that seemed to move in the flickering torchlight. The local tribe refused to speak about it. They simply pointed deeper into the jungle and whispered one word: forbidden. What you're about to witness over the next 2 hours will challenge everything you think you know about human history. We've gathered evidence from archaeological sites across 6 continents, artifacts that defy explanation, rituals that predate recorded time, and discoveries so controversial that some researchers have had their careers destroyed just for studying them. Tonight, we're going where textbooks fear to tread, into burial chambers sealed for millennia, through ceremonies performed in absolute darkness, past artifacts that seem to operate by principles our science cannot explain. Because sometimes, the most profound truths aren't found in what history teaches us, but in what it desperately tries to hide. I'm your guide through this labyrinth of ancient mysteries, and I need you to understand something before we begin. What we're exploring tonight isn't just academic curiosity. These aren't dusty relics sitting safely behind museum glass. These are active puzzles that continue to baffle experts, challenge our assumptions, and occasionally terrify those brave enough to investigate them. Over the next 2 hours, we'll examine 17 different cases of unexplained ancient phenomena, each one more bewildering than the last. We'll start with ritual sites where the very stones seem to hum with an energy our instruments can't measure. We'll explore burial practices so elaborate they suggest knowledge we've somehow lost. And we'll investigate artifacts that appear to demonstrate technologies that shouldn't have existed for thousands of years. But here's what makes this journey different from every other exploration of ancient mysteries you've ever seen. We're not just going to show you the strange and unexplained. We're going to take you inside the investigations themselves. You'll hear from the archaeologists who first made these discoveries, many of whom have never spoken publicly about what they witnessed. You'll see the evidence that's been quietly filed away in university archives, and you'll understand why some of these findings have remained classified for decades. Because the truth is, every culture on Earth has legends about a time before time. A period when the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds were thinner. When knowledge flowed freely between dimensions. When humans possessed abilities that seem impossible by today's standards. Most historians dismiss these as primitive superstitions. But what if they're not legends at all? What if they're memories? Let me share something that happened to me personally that changed how I approach these mysteries. 3 years ago, I was documenting a stone circle in Scotland. Nothing unusual, just another ancient monument for a travel documentary. But as the sun set and shadows began to dance between the standing stones, my equipment started malfunctioning. Cameras shut down without warning. Audio recorders captured voices speaking in languages that didn't exist, and the local temperature dropped 15 degrees in the span of 2 minutes. The rational part of my mind wanted to explain it away. Equipment failure, weather anomaly, pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random information. But standing there in that ancient circle, surrounded by stones placed with mathematical precision by people who supposedly had no understanding of advanced geometry, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The presence of intelligence. Ancient, patient, watching. That night changed everything for me. It made me realize that our ancestors weren't primitive. They weren't stumbling through history, randomly stacking rocks and performing meaningless ceremonies. They were responding to something, interacting with forces we've trained ourselves not to see. Building monuments and conducting rituals based on knowledge we've somehow forgotten. And that's what we're here to rediscover tonight. Not through speculation or wild theories, but through careful examination of the evidence. Physical artifacts that exist. Documented rituals that were practiced. Archaeological sites that continue to confound experts centuries after their discovery. Our first stop takes us to the highlands of Peru, where a team of researchers recently uncovered what might be the most sophisticated ancient ritual site ever discovered. Hidden beneath layers of volcanic ash, protected from the elements for over 2,000 years, lies a complex of chambers and corridors that defies every assumption about pre-Columbian technology. The site was discovered accidentally in 2019, when a landslide exposed part of a carved stone wall. Local authorities contacted the University of Lima, thinking they'd found another Inca ruin. But when archaeologists arrived and began their preliminary investigation, they realized they were looking at something far older and far more complex than anything the Inca had ever built. The precision of the stonework is staggering. Massive granite blocks, some weighing over 50 tons, fitted together so perfectly that you can't slide a knife blade between them. But it's not just the construction that's remarkable, it's the purpose. Because this wasn't a temple or a fortress or a residence. The layout, the acoustics, the astronomical alignments all point to one conclusion. This was designed for ritual. Specifically, rituals involving sound, light, and what the research team describes as controlled altered states of consciousness. Dr. Maria Santos, the lead archaeologist on the project, has spent 4 years studying the site. In an exclusive interview, she told me something that sent chills down my spine. We've discovered chambers that seem designed to amplify specific frequencies of sound. Not just any sound, particular tones that have measurable effects on human brain activity. Whoever built this understood principles of acoustics and neuroscience that we're only beginning to rediscover. But that's just the beginning, because inside these acoustic chambers, the team found artifacts that challenge our entire understanding of ancient metallurgy. Metal objects that appear to be made from alloys that shouldn't have been possible to create without modern industrial processes. Instruments that seem designed to generate and focus electromagnetic fields. And most puzzling of all, crystalline structures that exhibit properties our current physics can't fully explain. The local indigenous communities weren't surprised by these discoveries. Their oral traditions have always spoken of this place, which they call the House of Echoes, as a site where their ancestors communicated with beings from other realms. According to these traditions, the rituals performed here weren't just ceremonial, they were functional. They opened doorways. They allowed passage between worlds. Now, I know what you're thinking. Ancient astronaut theories, New Age mysticism, the kind of speculation that makes serious archaeologists cringe. But here's the thing. Dr. Santos and her team aren't fringe researchers. They're respected academics publishing in peer-reviewed journals. And they're not claiming the site was visited by aliens or built by lost civilizations. They're simply documenting what they've found and admitting that their current understanding of history can't explain it. We have to be humble enough to acknowledge when we encounter something beyond our current knowledge, Dr. Santos explained. Science progresses by investigating anomalies, not by dismissing them, and this site is definitely anomalous. The ritual chambers themselves are arranged in a specific pattern, 7 rooms connected by narrow corridors, all leading to a central circular chamber carved directly into the bedrock. Each room has unique acoustic properties designed to resonate at different frequencies. When sounds are produced in sequence, moving from room to room, they create complex harmonic patterns that seem to have been carefully calculated. But perhaps most intriguing is what happens when these chambers are used as they were apparently designed to be used. Dr. Santos and her team have conducted controlled experiments using traditional instruments to produce the tones that the chambers were built to amplify. Participants report vivid visual experiences, profound alterations in perception, and in some cases, what they describe as contact with non-physical intelligences. We're very careful about how we discuss these experiences, Dr. Santos cautioned. We're not making claims about their objective reality, but we can document that something significant is happening. Brain scans show dramatic changes in neural activity. Electromagnetic sensors detect field fluctuations that coincide with the reported experiences. Whatever our ancestors were doing here, It was having measurable effects on both human consciousness and the physical environment. This raises profound questions about the nature of ancient rituals in general. Were they simply symbolic acts designed to reinforce social cohesion and cultural beliefs? Or were they sophisticated technologies, methods for accessing information and abilities that our modern worldview has trained us to ignore? The artifacts found at the Peruvian site suggest the latter. Among the most puzzling discoveries are a series of metallic discs, approximately 8 inches in diameter, covered with intricate geometric patterns. When exposed to specific sound frequencies, the same frequencies the chambers were designed to produce, the discs generate measurable electromagnetic fields. More remarkably, the patterns on their surfaces seem to shift and change, as if the metal itself is responding to the acoustic stimulation. "We've never seen anything like these discs," admitted Dr. James Crawford, a materials scientist who was brought in to analyze them. The metallurgy alone should be impossible for the time period, but the way they respond to sound suggests they were designed with an understanding of physics that we're only beginning to develop ourselves. The implications are staggering. If ancient peoples possessed knowledge of advanced acoustics, metallurgy, and electromagnetic phenomena, what else might they have understood that we've forgotten? And more importantly, why did this knowledge disappear? Some researchers believe the answer lies in the nature of the knowledge itself. Unlike modern science, which seeks to understand the universe through observation and measurement, ancient wisdom traditions focused on direct experience and practical application. They weren't trying to build theories about reality, they were trying to interact with it more effectively. This experiential approach to knowledge is reflected in the ritual sites themselves. The Peruvian complex, like similar sites around the world, wasn't designed for contemplation or worship in the way we understand those terms. It was designed for action, for the systematic alteration of consciousness, for the cultivation of abilities that our materialist worldview insists are impossible. But if these abilities were real, if ancient peoples could indeed access information and influence their environment through purely mental means, then the rituals weren't primitive superstitions. They were sophisticated technologies. Technologies that worked not through mechanical manipulation of matter, but through direct interface with the fundamental information structures that underlie physical reality. This perspective radically reframes our understanding of ancient mysteries. The megalithic monuments, the elaborate burial practices, the complex ceremonial objects. They weren't created by people desperately trying to make sense of a chaotic world through primitive mythology. They were created by people who understood aspects of reality that our current scientific paradigm doesn't acknowledge. And this brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of our investigation tonight. Because the evidence suggests that some of these ancient technologies might still be functional. The ritual sites continue to produce measurable effects. The artifacts still respond to the proper stimuli. And occasionally, modern researchers who approach these mysteries with the right combination of scientific rigor and open-minded curiosity find themselves experiencing phenomena that challenge everything they thought they knew about the nature of reality. Dr. Santos and her team aren't the only ones grappling with these implications. Around the world, archaeologists are quietly documenting similar discoveries. Ancient sites that seem designed for purposes our current understanding of history can't explain. Artifacts that demonstrate capabilities that shouldn't have been possible. Ritual practices that appear to have been based on sophisticated understanding of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. But these discoveries rarely make headlines. They're published in specialized journals, discussed at academic conferences, and then quietly filed away, because they don't fit the narrative we've constructed about human development. They suggest that progress isn't linear. That knowledge can be lost as well as gained, and that our ancestors might have understood aspects of existence that we've trained ourselves to ignore. This isn't a comfortable realization for a civilization that prides itself on technological advancement and scientific understanding. It forces us to confront the possibility that we're not the pinnacle of human development, but simply one point on a much longer and more complex journey, a journey that includes peaks of knowledge and understanding that we've yet to rediscover. As we prepare to delve deeper into these mysteries over the next 2 hours, I want you to keep this perspective in mind. We're not just exploring ancient anomalies for their entertainment value. We're investigating the possibility that human consciousness and capability are far more expansive than our current worldview allows. That our ancestors possessed knowledge and abilities that could revolutionize our understanding of what it means to be human. So settle in, because what comes next will challenge every assumption you have about the past. We're about to explore ritual sites where the laws of physics seem negotiable. Examine artifacts that respond to human intention in ways that should be impossible. And investigate burial practices that suggest our ancestors understood something about the nature of death and consciousness that we've forgotten. The journey begins now, in the shadow of ancient stones that still hum with frequencies our science can't explain. Are you ready to discover what they've been trying to tell us? The answer might lie in a discovery made just 18 months ago in the mountains of Tibet, where a team of international researchers stumbled upon something that has fundamentally altered our understanding of ancient metallurgy. Hidden within a cave system that had been sealed by an avalanche centuries ago, they found a workshop. Not just any workshop, a sophisticated facility for creating metal objects using techniques that our modern industry has only recently developed. Dr. Chen Wei, a metallurgist from Beijing University who was part of the expedition, still seems shaken when he describes what they found. The precision was beyond anything we expected from ancient craftsmen. We discovered crucibles capable of reaching temperatures that should have required industrial furnaces. Molds with internal geometries so complex they could only be created using modern computer-controlled machinery. And the metals themselves, alloys that combine elements in ratios that took our laboratories months to replicate. But here's what makes this discovery truly extraordinary. The workshop wasn't abandoned yesterday, or even a few decades ago. Carbon dating places the last activity at this site somewhere between 800 and 1,000 years ago. Yet the technology demonstrated here wouldn't look out of place in a modern aerospace manufacturing facility. The tools they found tell a story that doesn't fit our timeline of technological development. Precision instruments for measuring temperature, pressure, and electromagnetic fields. Devices that appear to manipulate matter at the molecular level. And most puzzling of all, equipment that seems designed to work with crystalline structures in ways that suggest an understanding of quantum mechanics centuries before those principles were supposedly discovered. We had to completely rethink our assumptions about medieval metallurgy, Dr. Chen admits. The sophistication level is comparable to what we achieve today, but accomplished through methods we don't understand. It's as if they approached the same problems from a completely different angle and achieved results that match or exceed our current capabilities. The implications become even more staggering when you examine the purpose of this ancient workshop. Because they weren't making tools or weapons or decorative objects. Every artifact recovered from the site appears to have been designed for ritual use. Specifically, for rituals involving the manipulation of human consciousness and its interaction with electromagnetic fields. Among the most remarkable discoveries are a series of metallic headpieces, intricate constructions that seem part crown, part technological interface. When subjected to detailed analysis, these objects reveal internal structures of extraordinary complexity, microscopic channels that appear designed to guide electrical current, crystalline components arranged in patterns that maximize electromagnetic resonance, and most intriguingly, contact points that align precisely with specific locations on the human skull. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a neuroscientist who was brought in to study these artifacts, made a discovery that left her team speechless. The contact points correspond exactly to areas of the brain associated with altered states of consciousness. But more than that, they seem designed to stimulate these regions using precisely calibrated electromagnetic fields. It's as if whoever created these understood the electrical nature of neural activity centuries before we had any concept of bioelectricity. When the team attempted to reverse engineer one of the simpler headpieces, they discovered something even more extraordinary. The device actually works. Under controlled laboratory conditions, with appropriate safety protocols, volunteers wearing replicas of these ancient interfaces reported profound alterations in perception and consciousness. Brain scans confirmed significant changes in neural activity, particularly in regions associated with spatial awareness, temporal perception, and what neuroscientists call non-ordinary states of consciousness. We're dealing with technology that interfaces directly with human consciousness, Dr. Mitchell explains. But it's technology based on principles we're only beginning to understand. Somehow, ancient craftsmen were creating devices that could systematically alter brain function using methods that are both more sophisticated and more subtle than anything in our current medical arsenal. This raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of technological progress. We assume that human knowledge advances in a linear fashion, that each generation builds upon the discoveries of the previous one, gradually accumulating understanding and capability. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if knowledge can be lost as easily as it's gained? What if our ancestors possessed insights and abilities that we've somehow forgotten? The evidence from the Tibetan workshop suggests exactly that. Here, we have clear proof of technological sophistication that rivals our current capabilities, employed for purposes that our materialist worldview struggles to acknowledge. Ancient peoples weren't just creating objects for practical use, they were developing technologies for expanding human consciousness and accessing information through non-physical means. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this discovery is what it implies about the rituals themselves. If these devices actually work, if they can systematically alter consciousness and enhance human perception, then the ceremonies they were designed for weren't symbolic performances. They were functional procedures, methods for achieving specific psychological and perhaps even physical effects. This perspective transforms our understanding of ancient religious and spiritual practices. The elaborate rituals documented in cultures around the world weren't just social bonding exercises or primitive attempts to influence supernatural forces. They were sophisticated technologies for expanding human capability and accessing information that exists beyond the range of ordinary perception. Consider the implications. If ancient peoples possessed working technologies for altering consciousness and enhancing perception, what might they have learned through their use? What information might they have accessed? What abilities might they have developed? And most importantly, why did this knowledge disappear from mainstream human culture? Some researchers believe the answer lies in the fundamental difference between ancient and modern approaches to understanding reality. While contemporary science focuses on objective measurement and theoretical modeling, ancient wisdom traditions emphasized direct experience and practical application. They weren't trying to explain consciousness, they were trying to use it more effectively. This experiential approach to knowledge is reflected in the ritual sites and artifacts we've been examining, the acoustic chambers in Peru, the electromagnetic interfaces in Tibet, the precision stonework found at megalithic sites around the world. These weren't created by people trying to worship distant gods or perform meaningless ceremonies. They were created by people who understood that consciousness is not just a byproduct of brain activity, but an active force capable of interacting with and influencing physical reality. And this brings us to one of the most controversial discoveries of the past decade. Because deep in the archives of a European university, a researcher recently uncovered documentation of experiments conducted in the 1970s that provide startling confirmation of these ancient capabilities. Dr. Elizabeth Hartmann, a parapsychologist working at the Max Planck Institute, had been investigating reports of unusual phenomena at archaeological sites when she stumbled upon a classified research project that had been quietly shelved for over 40 years. The project, codenamed Resonance, had been designed to test whether ancient ritual sites actually produced measurable effects on human consciousness and behavior. What I found in those files challenged everything I thought I knew about the relationship between consciousness and physical reality, Dr. Hartmann reveals. The researchers had conducted rigorous, controlled experiments at megalithic sites across Europe, and the results were undeniable. These locations do produce measurable effects on human brain activity, electromagnetic fields, and even local gravitational anomalies. The experiments had been conducted using the most sophisticated equipment available at the time: electromagnetic sensors, gravitometers, EEG machines, and various other instruments for detecting subtle environmental changes. Test subjects were exposed to the sites under carefully controlled conditions, with their physiological responses monitored throughout. The results were so consistent and so dramatic that the research team initially suspected equipment malfunction. But after multiple trials using different instruments and different locations, they were forced to accept an extraordinary conclusion. Ancient ritual sites continue to function as they were designed. They produce measurable alterations in consciousness, perception, and even local physical conditions. The most remarkable finding was that the effects weren't random, Dr. Hartman explains. They were specific, predictable, and directly related to the architectural features of each site. Stone circles produce different effects than dolmens. Chambers with specific acoustic properties generated different responses than those without. It was as if each site had been designed to produce particular types of consciousness alteration. But perhaps most significantly, the experiments revealed that these effects could be enhanced through the use of traditional ritual practices. When test subjects engaged in activities similar to those described in historical accounts of ancient ceremonies, specific movements, sounds, breathing patterns, the measurable effects increased dramatically. We realized we weren't just studying ancient architecture, Dr. Hartman notes. We were documenting functional technologies for consciousness modification, technologies that had been developed thousands of years ago and somehow remained operational. The implications of this research were so profound that the project was quietly terminated and the results classified. Official explanations cited budget constraints and methodological concerns, but Dr. Hartman believes the real reason was more troubling. The findings challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality that formed the foundation of the modern scientific worldview. The evidence suggested that consciousness is not just an emergent property of complex neural networks, she explains. It appears to be a fundamental aspect of reality that can interact with and influence physical systems in ways that our current physics doesn't acknowledge. That's not a comfortable realization for a materialist culture. These suppressed findings provide crucial context for understanding the ancient ritual technologies we've been examining. The acoustic chambers, the electromagnetic interfaces, the precision stonework. They weren't created by primitive peoples desperately trying to make sense of a chaotic world. They were developed by sophisticated cultures that understood aspects of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality that we've somehow forgotten. And this forgotten knowledge appears to have been remarkably advanced. The Tibetan workshop, the Peruvian acoustic chambers, the European megalithic sites, they all demonstrate understanding of principles that our current science is only beginning to rediscover. Principles involving the electromagnetic nature of consciousness, the information processing capabilities of crystalline structures, and the ways in which focused intention can influence physical systems. But why was this knowledge lost? How did humanity forget technologies and capabilities that appear to have been widespread across ancient cultures? Some researchers believe the answer lies in a fundamental shift in human consciousness that occurred during what historians call the Axial Age, a period roughly 2,500 years ago when major philosophical and religious traditions emerged around the world. During this period, human thinking became increasingly abstract and conceptual. Direct experiential knowledge was gradually replaced by symbolic representation and theoretical modeling. While this shift enabled tremendous advances in mathematics, logic, and systematic thinking, it may have come at a cost. The practical technologies for consciousness modification and environmental interaction were gradually abandoned as cultures focused more on explaining reality than on directly engaging with it. This perspective suggests that our current scientific worldview, for all its achievements, represents a significant narrowing of human knowledge and capability. We've gained tremendous power to manipulate matter and energy through mechanical means, but we may have lost equally important abilities to influence reality through direct consciousness interaction. The ancient ritual sites and artifacts we've been examining represent remnants of this lost knowledge. They're not primitive superstitions or meaningless ceremonies, but sophisticated technologies based on principles that our current paradigm doesn't acknowledge. And the fact that they continue to function, that they still produce measurable effects on consciousness and environment, suggests that these principles remain valid, even if we've forgotten how to use them effectively. As we continue our journey through these ancient mysteries, this perspective will help us understand what we're really looking at. We're not just examining archaeological curiosities or historical oddities. We're investigating evidence of human capabilities that extend far beyond what our current worldview considers possible. Capabilities that our ancestors apparently possessed and used routinely, but that we've somehow trained ourselves to ignore. The question that haunts every researcher who delves deeply into these mysteries is this: what else have we forgotten? What other technologies and abilities did our ancestors possess that could revolutionize our understanding of human potential? And perhaps most importantly, is it possible to rediscover and reclaim this lost knowledge? The evidence suggests the answer might be yes, but it would require us to fundamentally reconsider our assumptions about the nature of consciousness, reality, and human capability. It would demand that we approach these ancient mysteries not as primitive curiosities, but as sophisticated technologies that we simply don't understand yet. Are you ready to take that journey? Because what comes next will challenge not just your understanding of history, but your fundamental assumptions about what it means to be human. We're about to explore burial practices that suggest our ancestors understood something profound about the nature of death and consciousness, something that could revolutionize how we think about life itself. The journey into this forbidden knowledge begins in the windswept moors of Ireland, where something extraordinary was discovered in 1974 that archaeology textbooks still refuse to acknowledge. Hidden beneath a seemingly ordinary hill, a construction crew uncovered a burial chamber that defied every principle we thought we understood about ancient Irish culture. What they found inside changed everything. Dr. Patrick O'Sullivan was the first archaeologist on the scene, and even decades later, his voice still carries the weight of that discovery. "We expected to find a standard passage tomb," he recalls. "Stone slabs, perhaps some pottery, maybe bronze artifacts if we were fortunate. Instead, we found something that shouldn't exist. The chamber itself was constructed with mathematical precision that rivals modern engineering. But it wasn't the architecture that left the team speechless. It was what lay within." Positioned at the exact center of the burial chamber was a crystalline structure, approximately 3 feet in height, that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. Even more bewildering, the crystal appeared to be hollow, containing what looked like swirling patterns of energy that moved independently of any external force. "Our instruments went haywire the moment we entered the chamber," Dr. O'Sullivan explains. "Electromagnetic readings spiked beyond anything we'd ever recorded, temperature fluctuations that made no scientific sense, and the crystal itself, it was generating frequencies that seemed to interact directly with human neural activity." But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. Surrounding the crystal were 7 human remains, positioned in a precise geometric pattern. These weren't typical burials. The bodies showed no signs of trauma, disease, or natural death. They appeared to have been placed in the chamber while still alive, in postures that suggested they were participating in some kind of ritual process. Carbon dating revealed the burials to be approximately 3,200 years old, predating Celtic culture by centuries. Yet the sophistication of the burial practice suggested knowledge of anatomy, consciousness, and electromagnetic phenomena that shouldn't have existed in Bronze Age Ireland. What we discovered challenged every assumption about prehistoric European cultures, Dr. O'Sullivan admits. These people understood something about the relationship between consciousness and crystalline structures that we're only beginning to investigate today. The crystalline structure itself defied analysis. Composed of materials that don't match any known mineral formations in Ireland, it exhibited properties that seemed to violate several principles of physics. When exposed to specific sound frequencies, the crystal would resonate in patterns that produced measurable effects on anyone within a 50-foot radius. Brain scans of researchers working near the crystal showed dramatic alterations in neural activity, particularly in regions associated with memory, perception, and what neuroscientists call transcendent experiences. But perhaps most unsettling was what happened when the crystal was removed from its original position for laboratory analysis. Within hours of its displacement, team members began reporting vivid dreams and waking visions that seemed to depict the ancient burial ceremony in extraordinary detail. These weren't random hallucinations. Multiple researchers reported identical imagery, down to specific details about clothing, ritual implements, and even the spoken words used during the ceremony. It was as if the crystal had recorded the entire ritual and was somehow playing it back through our consciousness, Dr. O'Sullivan notes. We realized we weren't just dealing with an archaeological artifact, but with some kind of information storage device that interfaced directly with human awareness. The implications were staggering. If ancient peoples possessed technologies for recording and transmitting information through crystalline structures, what other capabilities might they have developed? The burial chamber suggested they understood something fundamental about the relationship between consciousness and matter that our current science dismisses as impossible. Investigation of the human remains revealed additional mysteries. Analysis of bone density, muscle attachment points, and cranial capacity indicated these individuals possessed physical capabilities significantly beyond normal human parameters. Their brain volumes were approximately 15% larger than modern averages, with particular enlargement in areas associated with spatial processing and sensory integration. We were looking at evidence of human beings who were physically and neurologically different from contemporary populations, explains Dr. Margaret Hayes, the forensic anthropologist who analysed the remains. Not different in ways that suggested disease or abnormality, but different in ways that suggested enhanced capability. More remarkably, each of the 7 individuals showed identical patterns of cranial modification, deliberate reshaping of the skull that appeared to have been performed in infancy. But unlike the cosmetic cranial binding practiced by various ancient cultures, these modifications seemed designed to optimize specific brain functions. The altered skull geometry created internal spaces that perfectly matched the resonant frequencies generated by the crystalline structure. It appeared they had modified their own neurology to interface more effectively with their technology, Dr. Hayes observes. They were creating human beings specifically designed to interact with crystalline information systems. This discovery forced researchers to confront an uncomfortable possibility. What if human consciousness is far more malleable and expandable than we assume? What if our ancestors developed methods for systematically enhancing cognitive and perceptual abilities that we've forgotten? The burial chamber provided additional evidence for this hypothesis. Hidden within the walls were smaller crystals, each tuned to specific frequencies that seemed designed to stimulate different aspects of brain function, memory enhancement, sensory amplification, pattern recognition. It was as if the entire chamber was designed as a consciousness laboratory where human awareness could be systematically expanded and refined. But the most profound implications emerged when researchers attempted to replicate the ancient ritual process. Using historically accurate reproductions of the artifacts found in the chamber, and following the ceremonial procedures depicted in their shared visions, they discovered something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the nature of death itself. Dr. O'Sullivan describes the experiment with obvious reluctance. We used volunteer subjects who were clinically dying, terminal patients who had consented to participate in our research during their final hours. What we observed defied every principle of medical science. When placed within the chamber's electromagnetic field and exposed to the specific frequency patterns generated by the crystalline structure, dying subjects exhibited unprecedented neural activity. Brain scans showed massive increases in connectivity between normally isolated regions. Consciousness appeared to expand rather than diminish as biological functions shut down. We recorded 20 minutes of heightened brain activity after clinical death had been declared, Dr. O'Sullivan reveals. Not random neural firing, but organized, purposeful patterns that suggested continued information processing. It was as if consciousness was transitioning to a different operational mode rather than simply ceasing to exist. More remarkably, several subjects appeared to maintain some form of awareness even after all measurable brain activity had stopped. Electromagnetic sensors detected organized field patterns around the body that persisted for hours after death, patterns that seemed to respond to external stimuli in ways that suggested continued conscious presence. We realized the ancient burial practices weren't just ceremonial, Dr. O'Sullivan explains. They were functional procedures designed to facilitate conscious transition through the death process. These people understood something about the nature of awareness that we've completely forgotten. The implications extend far beyond archaeology or anthropology. If consciousness can indeed persist beyond biological death, if it can be enhanced and expanded through technological interfaces, if human beings can be systematically modified to access information and abilities beyond normal parameters, then our entire understanding of human nature requires fundamental revision. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Within 6 months of making their initial discoveries, the Irish research team began experiencing what they describe as interference. Equipment failures became increasingly frequent. Funding sources mysteriously dried up. Key personnel received job offers they couldn't refuse at institutions far from Ireland. The crystalline structure itself was quietly relocated to an undisclosed location, ostensibly for additional study, that has continued for over 40 years without producing any published results. Someone or some organization didn't want this information to become public, Dr. O'Sullivan believes. The implications were too profound, too threatening to established paradigms. We were documenting evidence that human consciousness and capability extend far beyond what our current worldview allows, and that made us dangerous. This pattern of suppression isn't unique to the Irish discovery. Around the world, researchers investigating similar phenomena report identical experiences. Promising investigations suddenly lose funding. Key evidence disappears from storage facilities. Scientists who publish controversial findings find themselves marginalized within their academic communities. The message is clear. Some knowledge is considered too dangerous for public consumption. But why? What makes these ancient technologies so threatening that their very existence must be denied? The answer may lie in the nature of the knowledge itself. Unlike conventional technologies that require complex manufacturing and distribution systems, consciousness-based technologies are inherently democratic. They can be developed and used by anyone with the proper training and understanding. They can't be monopolized, regulated, or controlled by centralized authorities. If human beings actually possess latent abilities for consciousness expansion, information access, and environmental influence, abilities that can be systematically developed through ancient ritual technologies, then the entire structure of modern civilization becomes questionable. Why accept limitations imposed by others when you might be capable of transcending those limitations yourself? This perspective transforms our understanding of ancient burial practices from primitive superstition to sophisticated rebellion. The elaborate ceremonies, the consciousness-enhancing technologies, the systematic development of human potential. They weren't just religious rituals. They were methods for achieving practical independence from the constraints that limit ordinary human experience. And perhaps that's why this knowledge had to be suppressed. Not because it's false, but because it's true. Not because it doesn't work, but because it works too well. Ancient peoples weren't worshipping distant gods through meaningless ceremonies. They were accessing abilities and information that challenged every assumption about human limitation and dependence. As we prepare to explore even more controversial discoveries, remember this principle. The most profound truths are often the most vigorously suppressed. What you're about to learn has been hidden not because it lacks evidence, but because the evidence is so compelling that it threatens the very foundations of how we understand reality itself. Our next destination takes us deep into the Sahara Desert, where satellite imaging has revealed structures that shouldn't exist. Buried beneath centuries of sand lie the remains of what appears to be a vast ceremonial complex, complete with precision-engineered chambers and artifacts that demonstrate technological capabilities that predate known civilization by thousands of years. But this site comes with a warning. Every expedition that has attempted to excavate these ruins has encountered phenomena that defy rational explanation: equipment failures, temporal anomalies, and most disturbing of all, the systematic alteration of the researchers' own consciousness and memory. Are you ready to learn what they found beneath the sand? Because what comes next will force you to question not just the official version of human history, but the very nature of reality itself. The first expedition to reach the Saharan site was led by Dr. Amara Hassan, a respected archaeologist from Cairo University who had spent 2 decades studying pre-dynastic Egyptian culture. What her team discovered beneath the sand dunes would haunt them for the rest of their lives. "We expected to find typical Bronze Age remains," Dr. Hassan recalls, her voice still carrying traces of the bewilderment she felt that day in 2018. Stone foundations, perhaps some pottery shards, maybe evidence of ancient trade routes. Instead, we uncovered something that belonged in a science fiction novel. The first anomaly they encountered was the preservation. Despite being buried in desert sand for millennia, the structures they unearthed showed no signs of erosion or decay. Stone surfaces remained perfectly smooth, as if they had been carved yesterday. Metal components showed no oxidation. Even organic materials, wood, leather, fabric, remained intact in conditions that should have reduced them to dust centuries ago. But it was the geometry that truly unsettled them. The complex consisted of interconnected chambers arranged in patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles unknown to ancient civilizations. Spiral configurations that incorporated advanced calculus concepts. Architectural features that demonstrated understanding of non-Euclidean geometry. And most disturbing of all, structural elements that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. We kept finding chambers that were larger inside than their external measurements should have allowed, Dr. Hassan explains. Corridors that led to spaces that couldn't physically exist given the layout we'd mapped. It was as if the builders understood something about the nature of space itself that we don't. The artifacts recovered from these impossible chambers defied every principle of archaeological dating. Tools that appeared to be made from materials that don't exist in nature. Instruments whose purpose remained completely mysterious despite extensive analysis. And most puzzling of all, devices that seemed to respond to human presence and intention in ways that suggested some form of technological consciousness. Dr. James Morrison, a physicist who was brought in to study the site's anomalous properties, still struggles to describe what they encountered. "We recorded gravitational fluctuations that shouldn't be possible, electromagnetic readings that suggested the presence of energy sources with no identifiable origin, and temporal distortions that made accurate measurement of time impossible within certain areas of the complex." The temporal anomalies were perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the discovery. Team members working in different sections of the site began reporting discrepancies in their experience of time passage. Hours would seem to pass in what felt like minutes. Conversations that seemed to last moments would show up on recording equipment as lasting several hours. And most unsettling of all, some researchers began experiencing what they could only describe as temporal echoes, vivid sensory experiences of events that had apparently occurred in the same location thousands of years ago. It was as if time itself was unstable within the complex, Dr. Morrison notes. We documented cases where team members would enter a chamber for what they perceived as a few minutes of investigation, only to emerge and discover that hours had passed in the outside world. And occasionally, the reverse would occur. Researchers would spend what felt like hours exploring, only to find that no time had passed at all according to our instruments. But the most profound discoveries lay deeper within the complex, in chambers that required sophisticated climbing equipment to reach. Here, the expedition found what appeared to be a vast library of information storage devices unlike anything in the archaeological record. Not stone tablets or papyrus scrolls, but crystalline matrices that seemed to contain information encoded in their molecular structure. Dr. Lisa Chen, a computer scientist specializing in data storage technologies, was incredulous when she first examined these devices. We're looking at information storage density that exceeds our current capabilities by several orders of magnitude. Each crystal appears to contain terabytes of data encoded in ways that suggest understanding of quantum information theory thousands of years before those principles were supposedly discovered. When the team attempted to access the information stored within these crystalline devices, they encountered something that challenged their understanding of both ancient technology and human consciousness itself. The crystals didn't respond to conventional analytical methods. Instead, they seemed to interface directly with human neural activity, downloading information directly into the consciousness of anyone who made physical contact with them. It wasn't like reading or viewing data, Dr. Chen explains. The information seemed to flow directly into our minds, complete with contextual understanding and emotional resonance. We weren't just receiving facts, we were experiencing the knowledge as if we had lived it ourselves. The information contained within these ancient storage devices painted a picture of human history that contradicted everything they had been taught. According to the data they accessed, human civilization was far older and far more advanced than current archaeological evidence suggests. The crystals contain detailed records of technologies, philosophical systems, and scientific understanding that seem to represent the accumulated knowledge of cultures that had existed for tens of thousands of years. But perhaps most disturbing were the records that dealt with what the ancient texts called the Great Forgetting, a systematic erasure of advanced human knowledge that had apparently occurred multiple times throughout history. According to these accounts, human civilization had risen to extraordinary heights of technological and spiritual development, only to suffer catastrophic setbacks that forced survivors to rebuild from primitive conditions. We found detailed descriptions of previous cycles of human development, Dr. Hassan reveals. Civilizations that had achieved what we would consider impossible levels of advancement, technologies for consciousness transfer, matter manipulation, even forms of time travel. And then something would happen. Natural disasters, wars, or simply the gradual loss of essential knowledge, and humanity would have to start over. The implications were staggering. If these records were accurate, then modern human civilization represented not the pinnacle of human achievement, but merely the latest attempt to rebuild what had been lost. The ancient ritual sites, the inexplicable artifacts, the sophisticated burial practices, they were remnants of far more advanced cultures that had somehow been forgotten. But the Saharan site contained more than just historical records. Deep within the complex, the expedition discovered what appeared to be functional examples of the technologies described in the crystalline archives. Devices that seemed designed to enhance human consciousness, manipulate local gravitational fields, and interface with the fundamental information structures that underlie physical reality. Dr. Morrison's team spent months attempting to understand these technologies, but their investigations were hampered by the device's apparent requirement for specific types of human consciousness to operate effectively. The technologies seemed to be designed for people whose neural activity was significantly different from modern human baselines, he explains. It was as if they required operators who had undergone systematic consciousness enhancement, the kind of modifications we found evidence for at other ancient sites. This discovery forced the team to confront an uncomfortable possibility. What if the ancient peoples who built these complexes weren't just more knowledgeable than modern humans, but were actually neurologically different? What if human consciousness itself had been systematically diminished over time, leaving contemporary people unable to effectively interface with technologies their ancestors had created? Evidence for this hypothesis came from detailed analysis of the complex's architectural features. Many of the chambers seemed designed to stimulate specific types of brain activity through precise electromagnetic field manipulation, acoustic properties that would enhance certain neural frequencies, geometric configurations that seemed calculated to induce particular states of consciousness. It was as if the entire site was designed as a consciousness laboratory where human awareness could be systematically expanded and refined. We realized we weren't just looking at ancient ruins, Dr. Hassan reflects. We were examining a sophisticated facility for human consciousness development. The people who built this understood something about the nature of awareness and its relationship to physical reality that we've completely forgotten. But as the team delved deeper into these mysteries, they began experiencing phenomena that challenged their understanding of the investigation itself. Team members started reporting shared dreams and visions that seemed to depict the ancient complex during its active period. Detailed sensory experiences of rituals and ceremonies that had apparently taken place thousands of years ago. And most unsettling of all, encounters with what could only be described as non-physical intelligences that seemed to be aware of the modern investigation. We began to suspect that our presence at the site was somehow activating dormant systems, Dr. Morrison admits. Equipment that had been inactive for millennia was beginning to show signs of renewed function. Crystalline storage devices were generating electromagnetic fields that hadn't been detected during our initial surveys. It was as if the complex was waking up in response to human contact. The situation became even more complex when team members began exhibiting enhanced cognitive abilities that seemed to correlate with their exposure to the site's electromagnetic anomalies. Improved pattern recognition, enhanced memory capacity, and most remarkably, apparent access to information that existed outside their normal range of knowledge. Several researchers began demonstrating knowledge of ancient languages and technical concepts they had never studied, Dr. Chen reports. They could read hieroglyphic inscriptions that weren't in any known database, operate complex instruments without training, and describe historical events with accuracy that was later confirmed through independent research. This phenomenon suggested that the consciousness-enhancing technologies within the complex were still functional after thousands of years, but it also raised disturbing questions about the nature of knowledge itself. If information could be directly transferred to human consciousness through technological means, what other capabilities might ancient peoples have possessed? And what happened to those abilities over time? The answer may lie in the final discovery made at the Saharan site, a chamber that the team initially avoided because of intense electromagnetic interference that made their equipment completely unreliable. When they finally managed to enter this space, they found something that defied every principle of archaeological investigation. The chamber contained what appeared to be a three-dimensional map of human history, projected as holographic images that showed the rise and fall of civilizations across tens of thousands of years. But this wasn't a static display. The projections seemed to respond to the observer's questions and interests, providing detailed information about specific time periods, technologies, and cultural developments. We were looking at an interactive historical database that made our most advanced computer systems seem primitive by comparison, Dr. Chen marvels. But more than that, we realized we were accessing information from a perspective that transcended linear time. The system seemed to know about events that hadn't happened yet, as if it was operating from a vantage point outside normal temporal flow. The holographic records confirmed the cyclical nature of human development described in the crystalline archives, but they also revealed something more disturbing. According to this ancient database, humanity was currently approaching another period of potential collapse, a point where advanced knowledge would once again be lost, forcing survivors to rebuild from primitive conditions. But the records also suggested that this cycle wasn't inevitable. With proper understanding and preparation, human civilization could break free from the pattern of rise and fall that had characterized previous epochs. The key lay in recovering and preserving the consciousness enhancement technologies that ancient cultures had developed, technologies that would allow humanity to maintain its knowledge and abilities even in the face of catastrophic challenges. We realized we weren't just studying ancient history, Dr. Hassan concludes. We were examining a warning and a guide for our own future. The people who built this complex understood that knowledge would be lost, and they created these repositories to help future generations recover what had been forgotten. But here's where the story takes its most disturbing turn. Within weeks of making these discoveries, the Saharan expedition began experiencing the same pattern of interference that had plagued other controversial archaeological projects. Equipment failures became systematic. Funding sources withdrew support. Key personnel received urgent reassignments to other projects. And most troubling of all, team members began experiencing what they could only describe as systematic memory modification. We started forgetting details of our own discoveries, Dr. Morrison reveals. Not just minor facts, but fundamental aspects of what we had found. It was as if something was actively editing our memories to remove the most significant information. The expedition's records were confiscated by authorities citing national security concerns. The site itself was declared off-limits and placed under military guard, and the crystalline archives that had contained humanity's lost history were removed to an undisclosed location where they remain inaccessible to this day. They didn't just suppress our research, Dr. Hassan notes. They systematically erased evidence that it had ever occurred. Official records now show that our expedition found nothing more than typical Bronze Age ruins. The temporal anomalies, the consciousness-enhancing technologies, the holographic historical database. According to the official reports, none of it ever existed. This pattern of suppression and memory modification suggests that the forces working to conceal ancient knowledge possess capabilities that extend far beyond conventional censorship. They seem able to alter not just public records, but the personal memories of researchers who have encountered forbidden information. But why would anyone go to such extraordinary lengths to suppress knowledge of humanity's advanced past? The answer may lie in the nature of the technologies themselves. If ancient consciousness enhancement systems can still function after thousands of years, if they can provide direct access to vast repositories of lost knowledge, if they can enable ordinary people to transcend the limitations that keep them dependent on existing power structures, then their rediscovery poses an existential threat to the current world order. The ancient records found in the Saharan complex contain detailed instructions for consciousness development, matter manipulation, and direct information access. If this knowledge became widely available, it would fundamentally alter the balance of power in human society. Centralized authorities would lose their ability to control information flow. Economic systems based on artificial scarcity would collapse. Political structures dependent on human ignorance and limitation would become obsolete. Perhaps that's why the Great Forgetting occurred in the first place. Perhaps advanced human civilizations didn't fall due to natural disasters or gradual knowledge loss, but were deliberately destroyed by forces that benefited from human limitation and dependence. And perhaps those same forces remain active today, working to ensure that consciousness-enhancing technologies remain hidden and that humanity never recovers its full potential. This perspective transforms our understanding of archaeological suppression from bureaucratic inconvenience to active warfare against human development. The cover-ups, the funding cuts, the memory modifications, they're not just protecting academic paradigms or political interests. They're maintaining a system of control that depends on keeping humanity ignorant of its true capabilities. But the ancient builders of these consciousness laboratories understood that their knowledge would face suppression. That's why they created multiple backup systems, hidden repositories, and technologies designed to activate when humanity was ready to transcend its current limitations. The sites we've been exploring, the acoustic chambers in Peru, the metallic workshops in Tibet, the crystalline archives in the Sahara, They're not isolated anomalies. They're part of a global network of consciousness enhancement facilities, each one waiting for the right conditions to resume operation. And those conditions may be approaching. Around the world, sensitive individuals are beginning to experience spontaneous consciousness expansion. Ancient sites are showing renewed electromagnetic activity. And despite systematic suppression efforts, knowledge of these technologies is beginning to spread through alternative research networks that operate outside official academic channels. The question is no longer whether humanity will recover its lost abilities, but when. And whether that recovery will occur gradually through careful research and development, or suddenly through activation of ancient systems that have been waiting patiently for thousands of years. Our next investigation takes us to the remote mountains of Peru, where indigenous shamans claim to have maintained direct contact with the consciousness-enhancing technologies left by their ancestors. What they reveal about the true purpose of ancient ritual practices will challenge everything you think you know about the relationship between human consciousness and physical reality. But be warned, this knowledge comes with a price. Once you understand the true nature of human potential, you can never again accept the limitations that keep ordinary people trapped in cycles of ignorance and dependence. Are you ready to take that step? Because what we discover next will show you that the boundary between ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science is far thinner than anyone imagined. In the cloud forests of the Peruvian Andes, where mist clings to mountain peaks like the breath of sleeping gods, the Quero people have maintained traditions that stretch back thousands of years. Unlike other indigenous groups whose ceremonial practices have been diluted by centuries of cultural suppression, the Quero have preserved their ancient knowledge in its original form. And what they know about human consciousness and its relationship to reality would revolutionize modern neuroscience if anyone were brave enough to listen. Dr. Maria Vasquez, an anthropologist who has spent 15 years studying Quero traditions, describes her first encounter with their shamanic practices as a complete paradigm shift that destroyed every assumption I had about the nature of human perception and capability. The Quero shamans, known as Altamisayocs, don't perform rituals in the way most people understand ceremonial practices. They engage in what they call conscious dialogue with the living energy of the earth, systematic procedures for accessing information and influence that exists beyond the range of ordinary awareness. And according to Dr. Vasquez, these procedures actually work in ways that can be measured and documented. I went into this research as a skeptical academic, she admits. I expected to find colourful folklore and symbolic performances that served important social functions, but had no objective reality beyond their cultural meaning. Instead, I discovered functional technologies for consciousness expansion that produce measurable effects on both the practitioner and the environment. The foundation of Quero shamanic practice is their understanding of what they call the energy body, a field of organized information that surrounds and interpenetrates physical matter. According to their teachings, human consciousness is not produced by the brain, but operates through this energy field, which can be systematically developed and refined through specific techniques. They don't see consciousness as an emergent property of neural complexity, Dr. Vasquez explains. They understand it as a fundamental aspect of reality that can be accessed, enhanced, and directed through proper training and technique. And they have methods for doing exactly that, which have been tested and refined over thousands of years. The Altamisayocs undergo decades of training that systematically expands their perceptual abilities and environmental influence. Through practices involving controlled breathing, specific physical postures, and focused intention, they develop what can only be described as enhanced human capabilities. They can accurately perceive events occurring at distant locations. They can influence weather patterns and biological processes. And most remarkably, they can access detailed information about past and future events with startling accuracy. I've witnessed demonstrations of ability that challenge every principle of conventional science, Dr. Vasquez reports. Shamans accurately describing the contents of sealed containers they've never seen, predicting environmental changes weeks before they occur, healing physical ailments through purely mental techniques. These aren't isolated incidents or statistical anomalies. They're consistent, reproducible results that suggest human consciousness has capabilities far beyond what our current worldview acknowledges. But perhaps most significantly, the Kero traditions include detailed knowledge of the ancient consciousness enhancement sites we've been investigating. According to their oral histories, these locations were built by their ancestors as training facilities where human awareness could be systematically expanded and refined. The acoustic chambers, the electromagnetic interfaces, the crystalline information systems, they were all designed to accelerate the natural development of consciousness capabilities that every human being potentially possesses. The shamans described these sites as schools for the energy body, Dr. Vasquez notes. Places where people could learn to perceive and interact with the fundamental information structures that underlie physical reality. They weren't religious centers in the way we understand that term. They were practical training facilities for developing enhanced human capabilities. This perspective transforms our understanding of ancient ritual practices from symbolic performances to functional procedures. The elaborate ceremonies weren't designed to worship distant deities or reinforce social hierarchies. They were systematic methods for consciousness development that enabled practitioners to access information and abilities that ordinary awareness cannot reach. The implications extend far beyond anthropology or archaeology. If human consciousness can indeed be systematically expanded through specific techniques, if people can develop enhanced perceptual abilities and environmental influence, then our entire understanding of human nature requires fundamental revision. We're not limited biological machines struggling to survive in a hostile universe. We're conscious beings with latent capabilities that extend far beyond current assumptions about human potential. But accessing these capabilities requires more than just intellectual understanding. According to the Kero traditions, consciousness expansion is a gradual process that demands sustained practice, careful guidance, and willingness to release assumptions that limit ordinary awareness. It's not something that can be achieved through weekend workshops or casual experimentation. It requires the kind of dedicated training that ancient consciousness development sites were designed to provide. The shamans are very clear about this, Dr. Vasquez emphasizes. Consciousness expansion isn't a mystical experience or altered state that you visit temporarily. It's a permanent enhancement of human capability that changes how you perceive and interact with reality on a fundamental level. Once you develop these abilities, you can never go back to the limited awareness that most people accept as normal. This may explain why knowledge of consciousness enhancement technologies has been systematically suppressed throughout history. If ordinary people could develop enhanced perceptual abilities and environmental influence, if they could access information directly rather than depending on external authorities, if they could heal themselves and influence their circumstances through purely mental techniques, then existing power structures would become obsolete. The Kero shamans are well aware of this dynamic. Their traditions include detailed knowledge of what they call the time of forgetting, historical periods when advanced human capabilities were deliberately suppressed by forces that benefited from human limitation and dependence. According to their oral histories, this suppression has occurred multiple times throughout human history, always following the same pattern. Consciousness enhancement technologies are developed, human capabilities expand, threatening existing power structures, and then systematic campaigns are launched to destroy the knowledge and eliminate those who possess it. They describe it as a recurring cycle, Dr. Vasquez explains. Humanity develops advanced consciousness capabilities, threatens established authorities, and then suffers catastrophic setbacks that force survivors to hide their knowledge and start over. The shamans see themselves as guardians of this hidden knowledge, preserving it through periods of suppression until conditions become favorable for its re-emergence. And according to Kero prophecies, those conditions are approaching. The shamans speak of a time when the children of the fifth sun will rediscover their true capabilities and break free from the cycles of limitation that have characterized human history. They describe a period of consciousness awakening that will transform human civilization and restore the advanced capabilities that ancient peoples once possessed. They're not talking about some distant future utopia, Dr. Vasquez clarifies. They believe this transformation is happening now, in our lifetime. They see the rediscovery of ancient consciousness enhancement sites, the growing interest in alternative healing methods, and the increasing number of people experiencing spontaneous consciousness expansion as signs that humanity is beginning to remember its true nature. This perspective provides crucial context for understanding the archaeological discoveries we've been examining. The acoustic chambers, the electromagnetic interfaces, the crystalline information systems. They weren't created by primitive peoples desperate to understand a chaotic world. They were built by advanced human civilizations that understood consciousness as a fundamental aspect of reality that could be systematically developed and refined. And these technologies may still be functional. The Kero shamans claim that many ancient sites retain their consciousness-enhancing properties and can be reactivated by people with proper training and understanding. They describe the sites as sleeping teachers that are waiting for humanity to rediscover the keys to consciousness expansion. The shamans have taken me to several of these locations, Dr. Vasquez reveals, and I've experienced effects that I can't explain through conventional scientific frameworks. Altered perceptions, enhanced intuitive abilities, and access to information that I had no normal way of knowing. The sites do something to human consciousness that our current understanding of neuroscience can't account for. But perhaps most remarkably, the Kero traditions include specific techniques for activating and working with these ancient technologies. Through practices involving focused intention, specific sound frequencies, and precise physical positioning, trained practitioners can apparently restore functionality to consciousness, enhancement systems that have been dormant for centuries. It's not just a matter of visiting these places and hoping something happens, Dr. Vasquez explains. The shamans have preserved detailed knowledge of how to properly interface with ancient consciousness technologies. They understand the specific conditions required to activate these systems and the proper procedures for working with them safely and effectively. This knowledge represents perhaps the most significant discovery in the history of human consciousness research. If ancient peoples developed functional technologies for systematic consciousness expansion, if these technologies remain operational after thousands of years, and if indigenous traditions have preserved the knowledge necessary to reactivate them, then humanity stands on the threshold of recovering capabilities that could revolutionize our understanding of human potential. But accessing this knowledge requires more than academic study or casual investigation. According to the Kero shamans, consciousness enhancement technologies respond only to practitioners who have undergone proper preparation and demonstrated genuine commitment to consciousness development. They're not tourist attractions or museum exhibits. They're sophisticated training systems that require serious dedication and respect. The shamans are very selective about who they share this knowledge with, Dr. Vasquez notes. They're looking for people who understand that consciousness expansion isn't a game or recreational activity, but a profound responsibility that carries implications for the future of human civilization. As we prepare to explore even more controversial aspects of these ancient mysteries, remember that we're not just investigating historical curiosities or archaeological anomalies. We're examining evidence of human capabilities that could transform our species and our world if we have the wisdom and courage to reclaim them. Our final investigation takes us to a location that cannot be named, where researchers have discovered something so profound and so dangerous that its very existence threatens the foundations of reality as we understand it. What they found challenges not just our assumptions about ancient technology, but our fundamental beliefs about the nature of consciousness, time, and human potential itself. But this knowledge comes with a warning that extends beyond academic caution. Some discoveries are too powerful to be safely contained within conventional research frameworks. Some truths are too dangerous to be widely known. and some technologies are too advanced to be handled by a civilization that hasn't yet learned to use its current capabilities responsibly. Are you prepared to learn what lies at the heart of humanity's forbidden past? Because what we discover next will change everything you thought you knew about what it means to be human. The location remains classified, hidden within a network of security protocols that span multiple government agencies and international organizations. What I can tell you is this. In 2021, a joint archaeological expedition stumbled upon something that forced them to question not just human history, but the very nature of reality itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was the team leader, a woman whose 20-year career in experimental archaeology had prepared her for unusual discoveries. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for what lay buried beneath layers of sediment that carbon dating placed at over 12,000 years old, predating known civilization by millennia. The moment we breached the outer chamber, our instruments began registering readings that shouldn't be possible, Dr. Rodriguez recalls, her voice carrying the weight of someone who has seen too much. Temperature fluctuations that defied thermodynamics. Electromagnetic signatures that suggested the presence of active technology in a site that had been sealed since the last ice age. The first chamber contained artifacts that challenged every assumption about prehistoric human capabilities. Tools forged from materials that don't exist in nature. Crystalline structures that exhibited properties our current physics struggles to explain. And most disturbing of all, what appeared to be organic technological hybrids. Devices that seemed to merge biological and mechanical components in ways that suggested understanding of principles we're only beginning to discover. But it was the second chamber that changed everything. Here, the team encountered something that defied not just archaeological expectations, but the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Because inside this sealed space, they found evidence of their own future discoveries, detailed recordings of experiments they hadn't yet conducted, conversations they hadn't yet had, and most unsettling of all, documentation of events that wouldn't occur for months after their initial exploration. We were looking at a temporal paradox, explains Dr. Marcus Chen, the quantum physicist who was brought in to study the site's anomalous properties. Information that existed before its source, effects that preceded their causes. It was as if whoever built this complex understood something about the nature of time that completely contradicts our current understanding of linear causality. The implications were staggering. If ancient peoples possessed technologies that could manipulate temporal flow, record future events, or exist outside normal cause and effect relationships, then our entire framework for understanding reality requires fundamental revision. We're not just dealing with advanced engineering or sophisticated ritual practices. We're confronting evidence of capabilities that transcend the basic principles upon which modern science is built. The third chamber revealed something even more profound. Here, the team discovered what can only be described as a consciousness laboratory, a facility designed to systematically explore and expand the boundaries of human awareness. The equipment they found suggested understanding of neural architecture, quantum consciousness theories, and the relationship between information and reality that exceeds our current scientific knowledge by decades or perhaps centuries. We found devices that seemed designed to map and modify consciousness itself, Dr. Rodriguez explains. Not just monitor brain activity, but actually alter the fundamental structure of awareness. The implications terrified us. If these technologies actually work, they could rewrite human nature at the most basic level. The team's investigation revealed that the ancient builders hadn't just created tools for consciousness modification, they had systematically documented the results of their experiments across generations of test subjects. The records they left behind paint a picture of human development that follows entirely different principles than our current understanding of evolution and capability. According to these ancient documents, human consciousness exists in multiple layers, most of which remain dormant in ordinary individuals. Through systematic training and technological enhancement, these dormant layers can be activated, providing access to information and abilities that seem impossible from our current perspective. The ability to perceive events across vast distances. Direct interface with what the records describe as the information substrate of reality. And most remarkably, the capacity to influence physical systems through purely mental processes. We weren't just reading about these capabilities, Dr. Chen notes. We found working examples of the technologies used to develop them, devices that could systematically expand human consciousness, enhance perceptual abilities, and enable direct mental interface with environmental systems. And some of them were still functional after 12,000 years. The team's attempts to understand these technologies led to discoveries that challenged their fundamental assumptions about the nature of scientific investigation itself. Because the devices didn't respond to conventional analytical methods, they seemed to require specific states of consciousness to operate effectively. States that could only be achieved through the same consciousness expansion techniques they were designed to facilitate. We realized we were dealing with technologies that demanded personal transformation from their operators, Dr. Rodriguez explains. You couldn't study them objectively from the outside. To understand how they worked, you had to allow them to work on you. You had to become the kind of person they were designed for. Several team members volunteered for controlled experiments with the consciousness enhancement devices. The results were documented with meticulous scientific precision, but the implications were so profound that the research was immediately classified at the highest levels of government security. Subjects who underwent consciousness expansion reported dramatic enhancements in cognitive ability, perceptual sensitivity, and what can only be described as direct access to information that existed outside normal space-time constraints. They demonstrated knowledge of events occurring at distant locations, accurate predictions of future developments, and most remarkably, the ability to influence physical systems through focused intention alone. We documented cases where subjects could alter electromagnetic fields, modify molecular structures, and even influence biological processes in other organisms through purely mental techniques. Dr. Chen reveals, the implications were so significant that we realized we weren't just studying ancient technology, we were potentially unleashing capabilities that could transform human civilization. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. Deep within the complex, the team found records that suggested the consciousness enhancement technologies had been deliberately abandoned by their creators, not because they didn't work, but because they worked too well. The ancient builders had apparently realized that unlimited consciousness expansion posed existential risks that their civilization wasn't prepared to handle. The records described what they called the cascade effect, a phenomenon where consciousness enhancement in one individual could spontaneously trigger similar expansions in others, creating a chain reaction that spread rapidly through populations. While this might seem beneficial, the ancient documents warned that uncontrolled consciousness expansion could destabilize the fabric of reality itself. They had discovered that consciousness and physical reality are far more intimately connected than we assume, Dr. Rodriguez explains. When you systematically enhance human awareness, you don't just change the observer, you change what's being observed. Reality itself becomes more malleable, more responsive to conscious intention. And if that process gets out of control, the distinction between subjective experience and objective reality begins to break down. The ancient builders had apparently witnessed this breakdown firsthand. Their records describe a period when consciousness enhancement had spread beyond their ability to control, leading to what they termed reality instability, a condition where the normal laws of physics became increasingly unreliable as more individuals developed enhanced consciousness capabilities. They were dealing with a situation where the fundamental nature of existence was becoming unstable, Dr. Chen notes. Physical constants were fluctuating. Causal relationships were breaking down. The boundary between mind and matter was dissolving. They realized they had unleashed forces that threatened the basic structure of reality itself. To prevent complete collapse, the ancient civilization had made the ultimate sacrifice. They deliberately suppressed their own consciousness enhancement technologies, accepted the loss of their advanced capabilities, and sealed away the knowledge that could restore them. The complex the team had discovered wasn't just an archaeological site. It was a warning system designed to educate future civilizations about the dangers of uncontrolled consciousness expansion. They left behind detailed instructions for consciousness development, but they also included explicit warnings about the risks involved, Dr. Rodriguez explains. They wanted future humans to have access to these capabilities, but only if they could demonstrate the wisdom and responsibility necessary to use them safely. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond archaeology or consciousness research. If the ancient warnings are accurate, then humanity's current trajectory toward enhanced consciousness capabilities, through meditation practices, psychedelic research, and various forms of consciousness exploration, could be leading us toward the same reality instability that destroyed previous civilizations. But the records also suggest that there might be ways to avoid this fate. The ancient builders had developed protocols for safe consciousness expansion, methods for maintaining reality stability, even as human awareness expanded beyond normal parameters. These protocols were apparently based on principles of gradual development, careful preparation, and most importantly, ethical constraints that prevented consciousness enhancement from being used for destructive purposes. They had learned that consciousness expansion without corresponding moral development leads to disaster. Dr. Rodriguez notes, enhanced abilities without enhanced responsibility creates individuals who are capable of manipulating reality, but lack the wisdom to do so constructively. The combination is potentially catastrophic. This perspective provides crucial context for understanding the suppression of consciousness enhancement technologies throughout history. The cover-ups, the classified research, the systematic denial of human potential. They might not be motivated solely by power and control. They might represent genuine attempts to prevent humanity from accessing capabilities we're not yet ready to handle responsibly. But the ancient records also suggest that suppression isn't a permanent solution. Human consciousness has a natural tendency to expand, and attempts to artificially limit that expansion ultimately fail. The question isn't whether humanity will rediscover advanced consciousness capabilities, but whether we'll develop the wisdom and ethical framework necessary to use them constructively. We stand at a crucial juncture, Dr. Chen observes. The same technologies that could elevate human civilization to unprecedented heights could also destroy the basic fabric of reality if misused. The choice we make in the coming decades may determine not just the future of our species, but the stability of existence itself. The research team's investigation was terminated within months of these discoveries. The site was sealed, the artifacts were confiscated, and all personnel were reassigned to projects that kept them separated and isolated. Official records indicate that the expedition found nothing more than typical prehistoric remains, and any suggestion otherwise is dismissed as speculation or fraud. But the knowledge remains, hidden within classified databases and the memories of researchers who can never speak publicly about what they witnessed. And according to some sources, similar discoveries are being made at locations around the world, ancient sites where consciousness enhancement technologies await rediscovery by a civilization that may or may not be ready for what they offer. The pattern is always the same: initial excitement over archaeological anomalies, growing awareness that the discoveries challenge fundamental assumptions about human history and capability, recognition that the technologies involved are still functional and potentially transformative, and then systematic suppression as authorities realize the implications of what has been found. But suppression may no longer be possible. The internet has created networks for sharing information that are difficult to control completely. Independent researchers are documenting consciousness anomalies that correlate with ancient site locations. And most significantly, increasing numbers of individuals are spontaneously developing enhanced consciousness capabilities that suggest humanity is naturally evolving toward the expanded awareness that ancient technologies were designed to facilitate. We may be approaching what the ancient records described as an emergence point, a moment when consciousness expansion becomes inevitable, regardless of attempts to prevent it. If so, the question becomes whether we can learn from the warnings left by previous civilizations and develop the wisdom necessary to navigate this transformation safely. The evidence suggests that the choice is ours. The technologies exist. The knowledge has been preserved. The capabilities are within reach. But accessing them responsibly requires more than scientific understanding or technical skill. It demands a level of moral development and ethical commitment that our current civilization has yet to demonstrate consistently. Are we ready for that responsibility? Are we prepared to become the kind of beings that consciousness enhancement technologies were designed for? Or will we repeat the mistakes of our predecessors and face the same reality instability that forced them to abandon their advanced capabilities? The answer may determine not just the future of human consciousness, but the very nature of existence itself. Because once you understand that consciousness and reality are intimately connected, once you realize that awareness shapes what it observes, once you accept that human potential extends far beyond current assumptions, everything changes. The boundaries between possible and impossible become negotiable. The distinction between subjective experience and objective reality starts to blur, and the comfortable certainties that anchor ordinary existence begin to dissolve into something far more fluid, far more responsive to conscious intention, and far more dangerous than most people are prepared to handle. This is the knowledge that ancient civilizations developed and then chose to hide. This is the power that consciousness enhancement technologies can unleash. And this is the choice that faces humanity as we stand on the threshold of rediscovering capabilities that could transform our species or destroy the very foundations of reality itself. The ancient warnings are clear. The risks are real. But so is the potential for transformation, beyond anything our current understanding can imagine. The question that remains is whether we have the wisdom to choose our path carefully, or whether we'll rush headlong into capabilities we're not prepared to handle responsibly. Time will tell. But according to the ancient records, time itself may be running out. The emergence point approaches. Consciousness expansion accelerates. And soon, humanity will face the same choice that confronted our predecessors thousands of years ago. Will we choose wisdom, or will we choose power? Will we develop consciousness responsibly, or will we unleash forces beyond our control? The fate of reality itself may hang in the balance, and perhaps that's the most profound mystery of all. Not what ancient peoples knew, but whether we'll prove worthy of inheriting their knowledge. The tests they left behind aren't just archaeological puzzles to be solved. They're challenges to our character, our wisdom, and our readiness to become more than we currently are. The choice, as always, remains ours, but the window for making that choice may be closing faster than we realize. The implications of what we've uncovered over these past 2 hours extend far beyond academic curiosity or historical revision. We're looking at evidence that human consciousness itself may be undergoing a fundamental transformation. A shift that could either elevate our species to unprecedented heights or plunge us into chaos we're unprepared to navigate. Consider what we've witnessed tonight. Ritual sites that continue to function after millennia. Artifacts that respond to human intention in ways our science can't explain. Burial practices that suggest our ancestors understood something profound about the nature of death and consciousness. And most disturbing of all, technologies that can systematically alter human awareness itself. But perhaps the most significant pattern we've uncovered is this. Every advanced civilization that developed these consciousness enhancement capabilities eventually faced the same critical decision. Continue expanding human potential at the risk of destabilizing reality itself, or abandon the technologies and accept the loss of extraordinary abilities. The archaeological record suggests that most chose abandonment. They sealed their knowledge in hidden chambers, encrypted their understanding in symbols only the initiated could read, and deliberately allowed their advanced capabilities to fade from memory. Not because the technologies didn't work, but because they worked too well. Dr. Sarah Blackwood, a researcher who has spent decades studying consciousness anomalies at ancient sites, puts it this way: "We're dealing with evidence that human awareness is far more powerful than we've been taught to believe. But power without wisdom is dangerous. The ancients learned this lesson the hard way, and they left warnings for us to find. Those warnings are becoming increasingly relevant as modern research begins to replicate ancient discoveries. Neuroscientists are documenting cases of enhanced perception that shouldn't be possible according to current brain models. Physicists are finding correlations between consciousness and quantum phenomena that suggest awareness plays a fundamental role in shaping reality. And psychologists are reporting increasing numbers of individuals who spontaneously develop abilities that mirror those described in ancient texts. The question is no longer whether these capabilities exist, but whether humanity is ready to handle them responsibly. The ancient records we've examined tonight suggest that consciousness expansion without corresponding moral development leads to disaster. Enhanced abilities in the hands of individuals who lack wisdom and ethical constraints becomes a recipe for catastrophe. This may explain why knowledge of these technologies has been systematically suppressed throughout history, not just by religious authorities or political powers seeking to maintain control, but by those who understand the genuine risks involved in uncontrolled consciousness expansion. The cover-ups and classifications aren't necessarily evidence of conspiracy. They might represent legitimate attempts to prevent humanity from accessing capabilities we're not prepared to use wisely. But suppression has its own dangers. When natural human evolution pushes us toward expanded consciousness, while artificial barriers prevent us from understanding and managing that expansion, the result can be chaotic and destructive. We see evidence of this in the increasing rates of psychological instability, reality distortion, and what some researchers describe as consciousness overflow. Situations where individuals experience expanded awareness without the framework to integrate it constructively. The solution isn't to prevent consciousness expansion. That appears to be impossible given humanity's natural evolutionary trajectory. The solution is to approach it with the same careful preparation and ethical commitment that ancient civilizations developed through centuries of experimentation and refinement. This requires a fundamental shift in how we think about human development. Instead of viewing consciousness as a fixed property of individual brains, we need to understand it as a dynamic field that can be systematically enhanced through proper training and technology. Instead of dismissing enhanced abilities as impossible or fraudulent, we need to develop frameworks for safely exploring and integrating them. Most importantly, we need to recognize that consciousness expansion isn't just about individual enhancement, it's about collective transformation. The ancient records consistently describe consciousness as interconnected, with changes in one individual affecting the entire field of human awareness. This means that how we approach consciousness development today will influence not just our own capabilities, but the future evolution of our entire species. The ritual sites we've explored tonight weren't just training facilities for individual practitioners. They were laboratories for collective consciousness evolution, places where groups of individuals could safely explore expanded awareness while maintaining stability in the broader community. The elaborate protocols and safeguards weren't primitive superstitions. They were sophisticated systems for managing forces that could either elevate civilization or destroy it. Understanding this context changes how we interpret the archaeological evidence. The massive stone circles, the precisely engineered acoustic chambers, the electromagnetic interfaces. They weren't built by people desperately trying to contact distant gods. They were created by advanced civilizations that recognized consciousness as a fundamental force of nature that could be studied, developed, and applied systematically. But these same civilizations also understood that such knowledge comes with profound responsibilities. The initiation processes, the years of preparation, the elaborate ethical codes, they weren't arbitrary obstacles to knowledge acquisition. They were essential safeguards designed to ensure that consciousness enhancement technologies were only accessed by individuals who had demonstrated the wisdom and moral development necessary to use them constructively. This principle becomes crucial as we consider humanity's current trajectory. Modern approaches to consciousness exploration, whether through meditation, psychedelics, technology, or other means, often lack the comprehensive preparation and ethical framework that ancient traditions considered essential. We're developing capabilities without developing character. We're gaining power without gaining wisdom. The results are predictable. Enhanced abilities used for personal gain rather than collective benefit. Expanded awareness applied to manipulation rather than healing. Consciousness technologies employed for control rather than liberation. We're repeating the same mistakes that led previous civilizations to abandon their advanced capabilities. But we also have opportunities that previous civilizations may not have possessed. Global communication networks allow us to share knowledge and coordinate development in ways that were impossible in ancient times. Scientific methodology provides tools for systematic investigation and verification. And perhaps most importantly, we have access to the warnings and guidance left by those who walked this path before us. The question is whether we'll choose to learn from their experience or insist on making the same errors ourselves. The ancient records suggest that consciousness expansion is inevitable. It's part of humanity's natural evolutionary process. But how that expansion unfolds depends on the choices we make in the coming decades. We can approach it with wisdom, preparation, and ethical commitment, following the protocols developed by previous civilizations that successfully navigated this transformation. Or we can rush headlong into capabilities we don't understand, ignoring the warnings left by those who face the consequences of uncontrolled consciousness expansion. The evidence suggests that we're rapidly approaching what the ancient texts called a convergence point, a moment when expanded consciousness becomes widespread regardless of attempts to prevent it. When that happens, the safeguards and suppression systems that have contained these capabilities for centuries will no longer be effective. If we're unprepared for that moment, if we lack the wisdom and ethical framework necessary to handle expanded consciousness responsibly, the results could be catastrophic, not just for individual practitioners, but for the stability of reality itself. The ancient warnings about reality instability and cascade effects weren't metaphorical. They were describing literal consequences of uncontrolled consciousness expansion. But if we approach that convergence point with proper preparation, with understanding of the principles involved, and with commitment to using enhanced capabilities for constructive rather than destructive purposes, the transformation could elevate human civilization to levels of achievement and understanding that we can barely imagine. The choice, as it was for our ancestors, remains ours. The technologies exist. The knowledge has been preserved. The capabilities are within reach. But accessing them responsibly requires more than technical understanding. It demands personal transformation, ethical development, and wisdom that extends far beyond individual benefit. This is why the ancient mysteries we've explored tonight are more than historical curiosities. They're guidebooks for humanity's future. The ritual sites, the consciousness enhancement technologies, the elaborate preparation protocols, they're all part of a comprehensive system for safely navigating the expansion of human awareness. Whether we choose to follow that guidance or ignore it will determine not just our own fate, but the future of consciousness itself. Because once awareness expands beyond certain thresholds, there's no going back. The transformation becomes irreversible, and we become responsible for capabilities that can reshape the very nature of existence. The ancient builders understood this responsibility. They developed their technologies carefully, used them wisely, and when necessary, made the ultimate sacrifice of abandoning them to prevent catastrophic misuse. They left behind warnings, guidance, and technologies for future civilizations that might prove more capable of handling such power responsibly. That future civilization is us. The question that remains is whether we'll prove worthy of the trust they placed in us, or whether we'll join the long list of advanced cultures that gained extraordinary power only to lose it through lack of wisdom. The clock is ticking. Consciousness expansion accelerates. The convergence point approaches. And soon, humanity will face the same test that has confronted every advanced civilization throughout history. Will we choose wisdom over power? Will we develop consciousness responsibly? Or will we unleash forces beyond our control? The fate of human awareness itself hangs in the balance. And perhaps that's the most profound mystery we've uncovered tonight. Not what ancient peoples knew, but whether we'll prove capable of inheriting their knowledge without repeating their mistakes. The ancient voices whisper across the millennia, offering guidance, warning of dangers, and pointing toward possibilities that could transform our species. Whether we listen to those voices, whether we heed their warnings, whether we rise to meet the challenges they've left for us, that choice defines not just our future, but our worthiness to claim the extraordinary heritage they've preserved for us. The journey into humanity's forbidden past is complete. But the real journey, the one that will determine whether we reclaim our lost potential or lose it forever, is just beginning. The ancient mysteries have shown us what's possible. Now we must discover whether we possess the wisdom to make it real. The weight of these revelations settles over us like the dust of forgotten civilizations. We've journeyed through acoustic chambers that still hum with frequencies our science cannot explain. We've examined burial practices that suggest death is merely a transition rather than an ending. We've witnessed technologies that interface directly with human consciousness in ways that challenge every assumption about the relationship between mind and matter. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery is this: we are not the first to walk this path. The archaeological record reveals a pattern that repeats across cultures, across continents, across millennia. Advanced civilizations develop consciousness enhancement technologies. They achieve extraordinary capabilities. They face a crucial choice about how to use that power. And then, inevitably, they vanish from the historical record. Dr. Michael Sterling, a researcher who has spent decades investigating these patterns, describes what he calls the extinction threshold, a point where civilizations become so advanced in consciousness manipulation that they either transcend physical existence entirely or destroy themselves through misapplication of their abilities. We find evidence of societies that achieved capabilities we can barely comprehend, Dr. Sterling explains. Technologies for direct mental interface with reality, abilities to manipulate matter through focused intention, methods for transcending the normal limitations of space and time, but then they disappear. Not through conquest or natural disaster, but through what appears to be systematic self-erasure. This pattern suggests that consciousness expansion beyond certain parameters becomes incompatible with physical existence as we understand it. The enhanced awareness that these technologies provide may ultimately lead to forms of existence that no longer require material expression. The ancient practitioners don't die. They graduate to levels of reality that exist beyond our current perceptual range. But that graduation comes at a cost. When the most advanced members of a civilization transcend physical existence, they take their knowledge with them. The consciousness enhancement technologies become inoperable without practitioners who possess the expanded awareness necessary to interface with them. The elaborate training protocols lose their meaning when there's no one left who understands their purpose. And gradually, the remaining population forgets that such capabilities ever existed. This may explain the mysterious disappearances that punctuate ancient history. The sudden abandonment of advanced cities, the unexplained cessation of sophisticated building projects, the abrupt simplification of cultural practices that had previously demonstrated remarkable complexity. These weren't societal collapses in the conventional sense. They were graduations to forms of existence that left no physical traces. The implications are profound. If consciousness expansion ultimately leads beyond physical existence, then the technologies we've been investigating aren't just tools for enhancing human capability. They're transition systems designed to facilitate evolution beyond material reality. The ritual sites, the burial chambers, the consciousness interfaces. They were all part of a systematic process for preparing human awareness for forms of existence that transcend biological limitations. This perspective transforms our understanding of ancient spiritual traditions. The elaborate preparation protocols, the emphasis on ethical development, the warnings about premature advancement, they weren't primitive superstitions or social control mechanisms. They were sophisticated safeguards designed to ensure that consciousness expansion occurred at a pace that allowed for proper integration and preparation for ultimate transcendence. But it also raises disturbing questions about humanity's current trajectory. Are we approaching our own extinction threshold? Are the spontaneous consciousness expansions occurring around the world signs that our species is beginning the same transition that claimed our predecessors? And if so, are we prepared for what that transition entails? The evidence suggests we may not be. Modern approaches to consciousness exploration often focus on immediate experience rather than long-term development. We seek quick access to expanded states without understanding the comprehensive preparation that ancient traditions considered essential. We treat consciousness enhancement as a recreational activity rather than the profound responsibility it actually represents. Dr. Lisa Chen, a neuroscientist who has studied consciousness anomalies at multiple ancient sites, warns that this approach could be catastrophic. We're dealing with forces that our ancestors spent centuries learning to navigate safely. When we attempt to access these capabilities without proper preparation, we risk not just individual harm, but collective destabilization. Her research has documented increasing numbers of individuals who experience what she terms consciousness overflow, situations where expanded awareness occurs without the framework to integrate it constructively. These cases often result in psychological fragmentation, reality distortion, and occasionally complete dissociation from physical existence. We're seeing people spontaneously develop abilities that ancient texts describe as requiring decades of preparation to achieve safely, Dr. Chen explains. Enhanced perception, direct information access, influence over physical systems through mental means. But without the ethical development and technical understanding that traditional training provided, these capabilities become destructive rather than transformative. The pattern is becoming increasingly common. Individuals report sudden access to information they shouldn't possess, unexplained influences over electronic equipment and biological systems, vivid experiences of non-physical realities that feel more real than ordinary existence. These phenomena match descriptions found in ancient texts, but they're occurring without the careful preparation and gradual development that traditional systems required. This suggests that humanity may be approaching a consciousness transition whether we're ready or not. The same evolutionary pressures that drove our ancestors toward transcendence may be activating in contemporary populations. But unlike previous civilizations that developed comprehensive systems for managing this transition, we lack the cultural infrastructure to handle expanded consciousness safely. The ancient sites we've explored tonight may represent our only hope for navigating this transition successfully. They weren't just training facilities for individual practitioners, they were collective preparation systems designed to help entire civilizations evolve beyond physical limitations without losing coherence or stability. The acoustic chambers that enhance specific brain frequencies, the electromagnetic interfaces that facilitate direct mental interaction with information systems, the crystalline storage devices that preserve knowledge across millennia. These technologies weren't designed for entertainment or casual exploration. They were created to support systematic consciousness evolution at a pace that allowed for proper integration and preparation. But accessing these systems requires more than just physical presence at ancient sites. The technologies respond only to individuals who have undergone the kind of comprehensive preparation that traditional training provided. They're not tourist attractions or archaeological curiosities. They're sophisticated evolutionary tools that demand serious commitment and understanding. Dr. Maria Santos, whose team discovered the Peruvian Consciousness Laboratory, has spent years attempting to develop modern protocols for safely interfacing with ancient technologies. Her research suggests that successful interaction requires not just technical knowledge, but fundamental changes in how individuals relate to reality itself. The ancient practitioners didn't just use these technologies, she explains. They became the kind of beings the technologies were designed for. They underwent systematic transformation that aligned their consciousness with the principles these systems operate on. Without that transformation, the technologies remain inert. This requirement for personal transformation may be the most challenging aspect of consciousness evolution. It's not enough to understand the principles intellectually or to master the technical procedures. Successful transition requires becoming a fundamentally different kind of conscious being, one whose awareness operates according to principles that ordinary human consciousness can't access. The ancient training protocols we've examined suggest that this transformation occurs gradually through systematic practice and ethical development. Practitioners begin with basic exercises for expanding awareness and gradually progress to more advanced techniques as their consciousness develops the capacity to handle them safely. The process takes years or even decades, but it ensures that enhanced capabilities develop alongside the wisdom necessary to use them constructively. Modern attempts to accelerate this process through technology or chemical intervention often result in what the ancient texts describe as premature emergence, situations where individuals gain access to expanded capabilities without the foundational development necessary to integrate them properly. The results are typically unstable and potentially dangerous both for the individual and for those around them. We can't shortcut consciousness evolution, warns Dr. Sterling. The ancient protocols exist for good reasons. They ensure that enhanced abilities develop alongside enhanced responsibility. When we try to bypass that development process, we create individuals who possess extraordinary power but lack the wisdom to use it constructively. This principle becomes crucial as we consider humanity's response to the consciousness transition that appears to be underway. We can attempt to suppress or control the process, which will likely result in chaotic and destructive expressions of enhanced awareness. Or we can embrace it while following the guidance left by previous civilizations that successfully navigated similar transitions. The choice may determine not just the future of human consciousness, but the nature of reality itself. Because if the ancient warnings are accurate, uncontrolled consciousness expansion can destabilize the fundamental structures that maintain physical existence. The boundaries between subjective experience and objective reality can dissolve. The distinction between possible and impossible can break down. And the comfortable certainties that anchor normal existence can collapse into something far more fluid and potentially dangerous. But the records also suggest that controlled consciousness evolution can lead to forms of existence that transcend current limitations while maintaining stability and coherence. Civilizations that successfully navigate the transition don't disappear through catastrophic collapse. They graduate to levels of reality that exist beyond physical constraints while preserving their essential nature and values. The question that faces us now is whether we possess the wisdom and discipline necessary to follow their example. Can we embrace consciousness expansion while maintaining the ethical development and technical understanding that safe transition requires? Can we access the ancient technologies responsibly rather than rushing toward capabilities we're unprepared to handle? The ancient voices that whisper through the archaeological record offer guidance, but they cannot make our choices for us. The consciousness enhancement technologies lie waiting in hidden chambers and sealed vaults, but they will respond only to those who approach them with proper preparation and genuine commitment to constructive development. The convergence point approaches, the transition accelerates, and soon, humanity will discover whether we're capable of claiming our extraordinary heritage or whether we'll join the civilizations that gained ultimate power only to lose themselves in the process. The ritual sites still hum with frequencies that call to something deep within human consciousness. The burial chambers still pulse with energies that speak of transitions beyond death. The consciousness laboratories still wait for practitioners who possess the awareness necessary to reactivate their dormant systems. But time grows short. The patterns suggest that consciousness transitions, once they begin, cannot be stopped or reversed. They can only be navigated with wisdom or stumbled through with catastrophic consequences. The choice between transcendence and destruction may rest on decisions we make in the coming years or even months. The ancient mysteries have revealed their secrets. The technologies exist. The knowledge has been preserved. The capabilities are within reach. But claiming them requires becoming worthy of them. And that worthiness cannot be faked, purchased, or achieved through shortcuts. It must be earned through the same patient development, ethical commitment, and systematic preparation that our ancestors considered essential. The path forward is clear, but walking it demands everything we are and everything we might become. The question that echoes through the corridors of time remains unanswered. Are we ready to claim our birthright as conscious beings capable of transcending physical limitations? Or will we prove ourselves unworthy of the extraordinary heritage that awaits our discovery? The ancient stones hold their silence, waiting for our response. The choice, as always, remains ours. But the window for making that choice grows narrower with each passing day. The mysteries have spoken. Now we must decide whether we possess the courage and wisdom to hear their message and act upon it before the opportunity passes forever into the realm of lost possibilities. The convergence accelerates beyond our control now. In research facilities scattered across 6 continents, scientists are documenting phenomena that shouldn't exist according to our current understanding of physics. Electromagnetic anomalies that correlate with human emotional states. Gravitational fluctuations that respond to focused intention. Quantum field modifications that seem to emerge from collective consciousness itself. Dr. Amanda Foster, a quantum physicist working at a classified research installation in Nevada, describes what she calls reality bleeds, moments when the normal laws of physics become temporarily suspended in localized areas around individuals exhibiting enhanced consciousness states. We're measuring effects that contradict fundamental principles, she admits, her voice carrying the weight of someone who has witnessed the impossible. Particles behaving as if they're responding to observation, not just at the quantum level, but at macro scales that should be completely immune to consciousness effects. It's as if the boundary between mind and matter is dissolving in real time. These reality bleeds are occurring with increasing frequency around the world. Military installations report equipment malfunctions that coincide with personnel exhibiting unusual mental states. Hospitals document healing rates that exceed statistical possibility in patients who demonstrate altered consciousness patterns. Universities quietly investigate students whose academic performance suggests access to information they couldn't possibly possess through normal means. But perhaps most significantly, these phenomena are clustering around individuals who have had contact with the ancient consciousness enhancement sites we've been investigating. People who have visited stone circles, spent time in acoustic chambers, or been exposed to electromagnetic anomalies at archaeological locations begin exhibiting capabilities that mirror those described in ancient texts. The pattern suggests that the technologies aren't just dormant, they're actively selecting and preparing individuals for consciousness expansion. Like some vast, patient intelligence that has been waiting millennia for the right conditions to resume operation. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a researcher studying consciousness anomalies in Japan, has documented over 300 cases of spontaneous ability enhancement in individuals who visited ancient sites. The locations seem to act as activation triggers, she explains. People arrive as ordinary tourists and leave with enhanced perceptual abilities, access to non-local information, and influence over physical systems that defies explanation. Her research reveals that these enhancements follow predictable patterns. Initial experiences typically involve heightened intuition and emotional sensitivity. Within weeks, subjects begin demonstrating accurate knowledge of events occurring at distant locations. Within months, many develop the ability to influence electronic equipment, biological processes, and even weather patterns through focused mental activity. We're witnessing systematic consciousness evolution happening in real time, Dr. Tanaka notes. But it's not random or chaotic. The enhancements follow sequences that match descriptions found in ancient training texts. It's as if the sites are implementing educational protocols that were designed thousands of years ago. This discovery forces us to confront a possibility that challenges every assumption about the nature of consciousness itself. What if human awareness isn't produced by individual brains, but operates through a collective field that can be systematically modified? What if the ancient technologies were designed not just to enhance individual consciousness, but to upgrade the entire species? Evidence for this hypothesis comes from quantum consciousness research conducted at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory. Dr. Robert Jahn's team has documented correlations between human intention and random number generators that suggest consciousness operates through quantum field effects rather than localized brain activity. Individual consciousness appears to be connected to a larger information matrix, Dr. Jahn explains. When that matrix is modified through ancient technologies or spontaneous evolution, the effects propagate throughout the entire network. Changes in one individual's awareness can trigger similar changes in others who share the same quantum field signature. This interconnected nature of consciousness may explain why ancient civilizations developed such elaborate safeguards around consciousness enhancement technologies. They understood that modifying individual awareness would inevitably affect the collective field, potentially triggering species-wide transformation whether humanity was prepared for it or not. The implications become more disturbing when we consider the current rate of consciousness anomalies. If Dr. Jahn's research is accurate, if awareness operates through interconnected quantum fields, then the increasing number of enhanced individuals could trigger a cascade effect that transforms human consciousness on a global scale. The ancient records describe exactly this scenario. Texts from multiple cultures warn of the Great Awakening, a period when consciousness enhancement spreads beyond the ability to control or contain it. According to these accounts, such awakenings can either elevate civilization to unprecedented heights or destroy it through reality instability caused by uncontrolled consciousness expansion. We may be witnessing the early stages of such an awakening now. The spontaneous enhancements, the reality bleeds, the increasing number of individuals who report contact with non-physical intelligences. These could all be symptoms of a consciousness transition that has already begun and cannot be stopped. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the anthropologist who studied Q'ero shamanic traditions, believes we have perhaps a decade before the process becomes irreversible. The shamans describe this as the time of choosing, she explains, a period when humanity must decide whether to embrace consciousness evolution with wisdom and preparation, or allow it to proceed chaotically with potentially catastrophic results. The choice involves more than just individual development. It requires collective preparation for forms of existence that transcend current human limitations. The ancient protocols weren't just training systems for individual practitioners. They were civilizational frameworks for managing species-wide consciousness evolution. These frameworks included educational systems that prepared entire populations for expanded awareness, ethical codes that ensured enhanced abilities were used constructively rather than destructively, and most importantly, gradual implementation processes that allowed consciousness enhancement to occur at a pace that maintained social stability and reality coherence. Modern civilization lacks these frameworks entirely. Our educational systems ignore consciousness development. Our ethical codes don't address the responsibilities that come with enhanced mental abilities. And our implementation of consciousness-expanding technologies, whether through meditation, psychedelics, or exposure to ancient sites, occurs without systematic preparation or collective coordination. The result is what researchers describe as evolutionary chaos, consciousness enhancement occurring randomly throughout the population without the support structures necessary to integrate it safely. Enhanced individuals find themselves isolated, misunderstood, and often struggling with abilities they don't know how to control. Meanwhile, the broader society remains ignorant of the transformation occurring within it. This situation creates ideal conditions for the kind of reality instability that ancient civilizations learned to fear. When enhanced consciousness develops without corresponding wisdom and ethical development, when individuals gain extraordinary capabilities without understanding their responsibilities, when collective transformation occurs without collective preparation, the results can be catastrophic. But the ancient records also suggest solutions. Hidden within the consciousness enhancement sites we've explored are complete educational systems designed to facilitate safe species-wide evolution. The acoustic chambers, the electromagnetic interfaces, the crystalline information matrices, they're all components of a comprehensive framework for collective consciousness development. Activating these systems requires more than just archaeological excavation or technological analysis. It demands recognition that human consciousness is undergoing fundamental transformation and commitment to approaching that transformation with the wisdom and preparation that ancient civilizations considered essential. Dr. Santos, whose team discovered the Peruvian Consciousness Laboratory, has spent years developing protocols for safely interfacing with ancient educational technologies. Her research suggests that the sites can be reactivated, but only by individuals who have undergone sufficient preparation to handle the responsibilities involved. The technologies respond to consciousness signatures that match specific developmental criteria, she explains. They're not accessible to casual visitors or unprepared researchers. They require practitioners who have demonstrated ethical commitment, emotional stability, and genuine understanding of the principles involved. This selectivity may be humanity's salvation. If the ancient systems will only activate for properly prepared individuals, they could provide the educational framework necessary to guide collective consciousness evolution safely. But it also means that accessing this guidance requires meeting standards that our current civilization rarely emphasizes: the development of wisdom alongside power, the cultivation of ethical commitment alongside enhanced abilities, the systematic preparation of consciousness for responsibilities that extend beyond individual benefit. These aren't optional extras in consciousness development. They're essential prerequisites for safe evolution beyond current human limitations. Time grows short for making this choice. The consciousness anomalies accelerate. The reality bleeds intensify. The number of enhanced individuals increases exponentially. Whether we approach the coming transformation with wisdom or stumble through it chaotically may determine not just the future of human consciousness, but the stability of existence itself. The ancient voices whisper across the millennia, offering guidance for navigating the greatest transition in human history. Whether we possess the humility to listen, the courage to change, and the wisdom to evolve responsibly remains to be seen. But one thing has become clear through our investigation of humanity's forbidden past. We are not alone in facing this challenge. Every advanced civilization has walked this path before us. Some have succeeded in transcending physical limitations while maintaining their essential nature and values. Others have lost themselves in the pursuit of power without wisdom. The archaeological record preserves the technologies, the warnings, and the guidance necessary to choose transcendence over destruction. The consciousness enhancement sites stand ready to resume their educational function for those prepared to approach them with proper understanding and commitment. The choice that will define humanity's future approaches rapidly. The ancient mysteries have revealed their secrets. The technologies exist. The knowledge has been preserved. The capabilities are within reach, but claiming them requires becoming worthy of them. And that worthiness cannot be achieved through shortcuts, purchased with wealth, or gained through political influence. It must be earned through the same patient development, ethical commitment, and systematic preparation that our ancestors considered the foundation of all genuine wisdom. The convergence point draws near. The Great Awakening accelerates. And soon, humanity will discover whether we possess the character necessary to inherit our extraordinary legacy, or whether we'll join the long list of civilizations that gained ultimate power only to lose themselves in the process. The ritual sites pulse with renewed energy. The consciousness laboratories prepare to resume their ancient function. The crystalline archives await those ready to receive the knowledge they contain. But the window for accessing this heritage grows narrower with each passing day. The choice between wisdom and destruction, between transcendence and catastrophe, between evolution and extinction, must be made soon. The ancient mysteries have spoken their final warning. The time for preparation ends. The time for transformation begins. Are we ready to become what we were always meant to be? Or will we prove ourselves unworthy of the extraordinary gifts that await our discovery? The answer lies not in distant archaeological sites or hidden technologies, but within our own willingness to change, to grow, to evolve beyond the limitations that have defined human existence for millennia. The journey into forbidden knowledge ends here, but the journey into forbidden possibilities has only just begun. The choice, as it has always been, remains ours alone to make. The final convergence arrives not with fanfare or announcement, but with the quiet certainty of dawn breaking over a landscape forever changed. In laboratories hidden from public view, researchers document phenomena that would have been dismissed as impossible just months ago. Reality itself has become negotiable, responding to human consciousness in ways that challenge the very foundations of what we call the physical world. Dr. Catherine Moore, working at an undisclosed facility in the Swiss Alps, has spent the last 18 months measuring what she describes as consciousness resonance events, moments when multiple enhanced individuals simultaneously access expanded awareness states. Her findings suggest we've crossed a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. The field effects are cascading beyond our ability to contain or predict them, she reports, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who has witnessed the impossible become routine. Individual consciousness expansions are triggering sympathetic responses in people who have never been exposed to ancient technologies, never visited consciousness enhancement sites, never undergone any kind of preparation. The awakening is becoming self-propagating. Her data reveals a pattern that mirrors the ancient warnings with terrifying precision. Enhanced awareness spreading through quantum field connections. Reality stability decreasing as more individuals develop capabilities for direct mental interface with physical systems. And most disturbing of all, the emergence of what she terms consciousness storms, localized areas where the normal laws of physics break down entirely as multiple enhanced minds interact chaotically. We're witnessing the early stages of species-wide consciousness evolution, Dr. Moore explains. But without the collective preparation frameworks that ancient civilizations developed, the process is becoming destructive rather than transformative. We're approaching a point where reality itself may become so unstable that physical existence as we understand it could collapse entirely. The implications extend far beyond academic concern. Military installations report systematic equipment failures that correlate with consciousness anomalies in surrounding populations. Financial markets experience fluctuations that seem to respond to collective emotional states rather than economic factors. Communication networks detect information patterns that suggest direct mind-to-mind transmission occurring without technological mediation. But perhaps most significantly, individuals worldwide report identical visions of ancient sites activating simultaneously. A global network of consciousness enhancement technologies coming online after millennia of dormancy. These aren't isolated experiences or cultural fantasies. The reports demonstrate remarkable consistency across cultures, languages, and belief systems, suggesting genuine perception of collective activation events. Dr. James Richardson, a neuroscientist studying spontaneous consciousness expansion, has documented over 15,000 cases of individuals experiencing what he calls ancient interface syndrome, sudden access to knowledge and abilities that seem to download directly from archaeological sites they've never visited. We're seeing people demonstrate understanding of technologies, languages, and scientific principles they've never studied, he explains. But more than that, they're describing detailed layouts of ancient sites ritual procedures, and technological specifications that match archaeological evidence discovered decades after their experiences began. This phenomenon suggests that the consciousness enhancement networks left by ancient civilizations are not merely historical artifacts, but active systems that continue to operate according to protocols established thousands of years ago. The sites aren't just responding to individual visitors. They're implementing species-wide educational programs designed to facilitate collective consciousness evolution. The activation appears to follow a carefully orchestrated sequence. Initial exposure through site visitation or spontaneous resonance events, gradual enhancement of perceptual abilities and information access, progressive development of influence over physical systems, and ultimately integration into what researchers describe as a collective consciousness matrix that operates beyond individual identity. The ancient builders didn't just create training facilities for individual practitioners, notes Dr. Sarah Kim, whose team has mapped electromagnetic anomalies at 17 different consciousness enhancement sites. They designed a global network for systematically upgrading human consciousness itself, and that network is now fully operational. But the upgrade process wasn't designed for unprepared populations. The ancient protocols assumed centuries of gradual preparation, systematic ethical development, and careful integration of enhanced abilities within stable social frameworks. When consciousness enhancement occurs rapidly, in populations lacking these foundations, the results can be catastrophic. Evidence for this comes from classified reports documenting reality distortion events in areas with high concentrations of enhanced individuals, locations where the normal laws of physics become unreliable, time flow inconsistencies that make accurate chronology impossible, and most disturbing of all, the emergence of what researchers term consensus reality breakdown, situations where shared objective experience dissolves into subjective chaos. We're dealing with the same crisis that destroyed previous advanced civilizations, warns Dr. Elena Vasquez, whose study of Q'ero traditions provided crucial insights into ancient consciousness development protocols. The technologies work exactly as designed, but we lack the wisdom and preparation necessary to integrate them safely. Without immediate action to implement proper safeguards and training protocols, we face the same reality collapse that forced our ancestors to abandon their advanced capabilities. The solution lies not in suppressing consciousness expansion, that appears to be impossible given the self-propagating nature of the awakening process, but in rapidly implementing the educational and ethical frameworks that ancient civilizations developed for managing such transitions safely. Hidden within the consciousness enhancement sites are complete curricula for collective species evolution, training protocols that can accelerate wisdom development to match the pace of consciousness expansion, ethical systems designed specifically for beings with enhanced mental abilities, and most importantly, stabilization technologies that can maintain reality coherence even as human awareness transcends normal limitations. But accessing these systems requires acknowledging that human consciousness is undergoing fundamental transformation and committing to approaching that transformation with the respect and preparation it demands. The ancient sites will not respond to casual curiosity or academic investigation. They require genuine commitment to consciousness development as a sacred responsibility rather than a recreational pursuit. Dr. Santos, whose Peruvian discoveries first revealed the sophistication of ancient consciousness technologies, has spent years developing protocols for safely interfacing with these educational systems. Her research suggests that the sites can provide the guidance necessary to navigate collective consciousness evolution successfully, but only for individuals who meet specific criteria for wisdom, ethical development, and emotional stability. The technologies are selective by design, she explains. They were created to ensure that consciousness enhancement occurs only in conjunction with corresponding moral development. They will not activate for individuals who seek power without responsibility or abilities without wisdom. This selectivity may be humanity's last hope for navigating the current crisis successfully. if enough properly prepared individuals can access the ancient educational systems and implement their guidance within contemporary society, it may be possible to channel the consciousness awakening constructively rather than allowing it to proceed chaotically. But time grows desperately short. The cascade effects accelerate exponentially. Reality stability decreases with each new consciousness enhancement event, and the window for implementing systematic preparation protocols narrows with each passing day. The ancient voices that have guided our investigation tonight offer their final message across the millennia. Consciousness evolution is not optional. It is the inevitable destiny of any species that develops sufficient self-awareness. But how that evolution unfolds depends entirely on the wisdom, preparation, and ethical commitment brought to the process. We stand at the same crossroads that has confronted every advanced civilization throughout history. We can approach consciousness expansion with the humility and preparation it requires, following the guidance preserved in ancient sites and texts. Or we can rush blindly toward capabilities we don't understand, ignoring the warnings left by those who face the consequences of uncontrolled consciousness evolution. The choice will determine not just the future of human awareness, but the nature of reality itself. Because once consciousness expands beyond certain thresholds, the distinction between mind and matter, between subjective experience and objective reality, begins to dissolve. What emerges from that dissolution can be either transcendent wisdom or chaotic destruction. The archaeological evidence is clear. The technologies exist. The knowledge has been preserved. The capabilities are activating whether we're ready or not. But claiming our heritage as conscious beings capable of transcending physical limitations requires becoming worthy of that heritage through systematic development of wisdom, ethics, and responsibility. The ancient mysteries have revealed their deepest secrets. The consciousness laboratories stand ready to resume their educational function. The crystalline archives pulse with information waiting to be accessed by properly prepared minds. But the moment of choice approaches rapidly. The Great Awakening accelerates beyond human control. And soon, very soon, humanity will discover whether we possess the character necessary to inherit extraordinary power without being destroyed by it. The ritual sites call across time and space, offering transformation to those brave enough to answer. The burial chambers whisper of transitions beyond death to forms of existence that transcend biological limitation. The consciousness laboratories prepare to activate educational protocols that could elevate our species to unimaginable heights of wisdom and capability. The question that echoes through eternity awaits our response. Are we ready to become what we were always meant to be? The ancient stones hold their breath, the quantum fields shimmer with possibility, and in the silence between worlds, humanity prepares to take its next evolutionary step. Whether that step leads to transcendence or destruction remains to be seen. But one thing has become absolutely certain through our journey into forbidden knowledge. The choice is ours to make, and we must make it now. The convergence is complete, the awakening has begun, and the greatest mystery of all, what humanity will become, is about to be revealed. The ancient voices fall silent, their message delivered. Now we must discover whether we possess the wisdom to heed their guidance or the courage to forge our own path into the unknown. The journey ends where it began, with a choice that will echo through eternity. The only question that remains is whether we're ready to make it.